A black truck driver is thrown into a creek by a sheriff's men, but they made one fatal mistake. They didn't check who her father was. The muddy water filled her lungs. Two men in county-issued uniforms laughed from the bank. "Learn your place, girl," one of them spat, his face a mask of contempt. This story is about more than just revenge. It's about a system being challenged from the inside. If you believe in fighting for what's right, hit the like button, subscribe for more incredible stories, and comment with your city in the word justice. Sarah wasn't a troublemaker. She was a long-haul truck driver, 28 years old, with calloused hands and a gaze that had seen thousands of miles of empty highway. She was just passing through Garrison County, a forgotten patch of the rural South where time seemed to move slower and old prejudices died harder. The county was the personal kingdom of Sheriff Dalton, a man who ruled with an iron fist and a network of loyal deputies who enforced his brand of order. Her crime was simple. She hadn't pulled over fast enough for the sheriff's convoy. It was a minor slight, but in Garrison County, it was an act of defiance. Two of Dalton's men, Deputies Miller and Kane, had cornered her at the Garrison Gas and Go. They didn't ask for her license. They didn't issue a ticket. They dragged her from her cab. "You think you own the road?" Miller had sneered, his breath smelling of stale coffee. "We're gonna teach you some respect," Kane added, shoving her toward the creek behind the station. They threw her in without a second thought. To them, she was nobody, just another face to put in her place. They laughed, got back in their patrol car and drove away, leaving her gasping in the cold, filthy water. They had done this before. It was a message. It was control. And it always worked. But Sarah was not a nobody. She was Sarah Jennings, the estranged daughter of U.S. Senator Marcus Jennings, a man whose name carried immense weight in Washington and beyond. A man known for his unyielding resolve and his deep connections within the Justice Department. She had walked away from that world of privilege and politics years ago, seeking a real life on her own terms. She never used her father's name. She never asked for his help. Sheriff Dalton and his men had just assaulted the one person who had a direct line to the highest levels of power in the country. They thought they were untouchable, but they had just kicked a hornet's nest they didn't even know existed. Their simple act of cruelty was about to trigger a war they were not prepared to fight. As Sarah pulled herself from the creek, covered in mud and fury, her mind wasn't on revenge. It was on something bigger. This wasn't just about two deputies. It was about the entire rotten system they represented. They had tried to break her, but what happens when the person you try to silence has the power to bring your entire world crashing down? Shivering, Sarah dragged herself back to her truck. The old man behind the counter at the Garrison Gas and Go saw her coming, his eyes wide with fear. He quickly looked down, pretending to wipe an already spotless counter. He wanted no part of this. He knew who Miller and Kane worked for. In Garrison County, witnesses had a habit of disappearing or having unfortunate accidents. Sarah didn't bother asking for help. The man's fear was more telling than any words. She climbed into her cab, the wet denim sticking to her skin, and drove away, watching the gas station shrink in her rearview mirror. She found a rundown motel on the edge of town, the Pine Ridge Motel, with a flickering neon sign and peeling paint. She paid cash for a room. Inside, the air was stale, smelling of old smoke and disinfectant. She stood under the shower for a long time, letting the scalding water wash away the creek's grime. But the humiliation lingered. This wasn't just a random act of violence. It was a calculated display of power meant to remind her, and anyone like her, of their place. They thought she was weak. They were wrong. Dressed in clean clothes, she sat on the edge of the lumpy bed and pulled out her phone. She stared at a contact she hadn't called in over a year, Marcus Jennings. Swallowing her pride was a bitter pill. She had left his world of sterile politics and backroom deals to prove she could make it on her own. Now she was about to use the very power she had rejected. But this wasn't for her. It was for every person who had been pushed down by men like Dalton and had no one to call. She pressed the button. Meanwhile, back at the Garrison County Sheriff's Department, Deputies Miller and Kane were recounting the story to Sheriff Dalton. Dalton was a large man, his uniform stretched tight over his gut. He sat behind a massive oak desk, polishing a silver belt buckle with a slow, deliberate motion. "She gave us some lip, Sheriff," Miller said with a smirk, "so we gave her a little swim to cool off." Kane chuckled. "Won't be seeing her again anytime soon." Dalton stopped polishing the buckle. He looked at them, his eyes cold and flat. He wasn't smiling. "Did you run her plates?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "Nah, no need," Miller said, his confidence wavering slightly under Dalton's gaze. "Just some drifter in a beat-up rig, not worth the paperwork." Dalton placed the buckle on his desk with a soft click. "You two are sloppy." "I don't like sloppy. It causes problems." He waved a dismissive hand. "Get out of my office, and try not to be idiots for the rest of your shift." The deputies left, their bravado gone. Dalton stared at the door for a moment before turning his attention to a map of the county on his wall. He had everything under control. Every road, every business, every person. A drifter in a truck was a loose end, but a minor one, nothing he couldn't handle. Back in the motel room, the phone was answered on the second ring. "Jennings." The voice was crisp, efficient, and instantly recognizable. "Dad, it's me," Sarah said, her own voice steady. There was a pause. "Sarah, are you in trouble?" No warmth, just straight to the point. "I'm in Garrison County," she said, skipping the pleasantries. "Two of Sheriff Dalton's deputies just threw me in a creek." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. Sarah could picture him in his Washington office, his face hardening, the political mask dropping to reveal the predator beneath. When he spoke again, his tone had changed. It was glacial. "Stay where you are. Do not engage with local law enforcement. Don't talk to anyone. An associate will be in touch." The line went dead. Sarah lowered the phone. The call was over. The machine was now in motion. Sheriff Dalton's small, controlled world was about to be hit by a hurricane. In Washington, D.C., Senator Marcus Jennings didn't slam the phone down. He placed it carefully back in its cradle. His office, overlooking the Capitol, was silent. He didn't pace. He didn't curse. He simply sat for a moment, his face an unreadable mask of stone. Then he picked up a different phone, a secure line with only a few pre-programmed numbers. He pressed one. The man on the other end answered without a greeting. "Hayes," Jennings said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Garrison County. Sarah is there. She was assaulted by local deputies. I want a full-spectrum response. Plausible deniability is rescinded." "Understood, Senator," the voice replied, equally flat. "I'm 2 hours out." The call ended. That was all it took. Less than 3 hours later, there was a knock on Sarah's motel room door. It wasn't the heavy, authoritative knock of a cop. It was 2 quick, precise raps. She looked through the peephole. A man in his 50s stood there, wearing a plain grey windbreaker and jeans. He looked like a tourist who had taken a wrong turn, but his eyes were sharp, constantly scanning. She opened the door. "Miss Jennings?" he asked. "I'm Hayes. Your father sent me." He stepped inside, his movements economical and quiet. He didn't offer condolences or ask if she was okay. He was all business. He pulled out a small, encrypted tablet. "Tell me everything," he said, his gaze fixed on her. "Names of the deputies if you heard them. The exact location, time of the incident, every word they said." Sarah recounted the events, her voice steady. Hayes typed, his fingers moving rapidly across the screen. He didn't interrupt. When she was finished, he nodded once. "The Garrison Gas and Go has 2 security cameras," he stated, not asked. "One on the pumps, one on the storefront. The angle from the storefront camera should have captured the patrol car and the initial confrontation. The footage is being backed up to a secure server as we speak. The original will be wiped locally within the hour." Sarah stared at him. This was the world she had run from. a world where problems were not solved, but surgically removed with terrifying efficiency. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Hayes said, looking up from his tablet, "we establish a foothold, and you become invisible. You'll be moved to a secure location outside the county by morning." Back at the sheriff's department, Dalton was enjoying his morning coffee when the dispatcher's voice crackled over the radio. "Sheriff, got a call from State Police Dispatch. They're asking if we had any interactions with a semi-truck. License plate 7KL381. Dalton froze. That was a small detail, but it was wrong. The state police never called him about minor interactions. He called them. "What about it?" Dalton grunted into his radio. "Just a query, Sheriff. It was flagged by a federal marker a few hours ago. They wanted to confirm its location." Federal marker, the words hung in the air. Dalton felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "Run the plate," he ordered his own dispatcher, his voice tight, "and find out who that truck is registered to." He paced his office while he waited. It was nothing, just a coincidence, but his gut, the same gut that had kept him in power for 20 years, was screaming at him. The dispatcher came in a minute later, holding a printout, her face pale. "It's registered to a holding company, Sheriff. Lexington Strategies, LLC. The name meant nothing. "Who owns it?" Dalton snapped. "It's managed by a law firm out of D.C., she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Kincaid and Stern." Dalton's blood ran cold. He knew that name. It was a powerhouse firm that handled sensitive work for Washington's elite. He snatched the paper from her hand. It was all there. The pieces clicked into place. The drifter, the truck, the federal flag, his deputy's sloppy, arrogant mistake. He slammed his fist on the desk, rattling the coffee cup. "Miller! Kane! My office! Now!" he roared. The two deputies, laughing down the hall, stopped dead in their tracks. They had no idea the storm that was about to break over their heads. Miller and Kane shuffled into Dalton's office, their cocky demeanor gone, replaced by a nervous uncertainty. Dalton was standing by the window, looking out at the sleepy town square. He didn't turn around. "You two had one job yesterday," Dalton said, his voice dangerously calm. "To be a visible deterrent. Instead, you decided to play games." "Sheriff, she was mouthy," Miller started, but Dalton cut him off, finally turning around. His face was a thundercloud. "The truck she was driving is registered to a holding company managed by Kincaid and Stern," Dalton said, letting the name hang in the air. "Do you know who they are?" Miller and Kane just stared blankly. "They're fixers," Dalton spat. "For senators, for billionaires. For people who can make a phone call and have the IRS, the FBI, and God himself crawling up your backside before lunchtime. Now, who do you think was driving that truck?" The color drained from their faces. The reality of their mistake was crashing down on them. "You didn't just rough up a drifter," Dalton continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You assaulted someone important, someone with a very long reach, and you did it right in front of a gas station with cameras." "We can get the tape," Kane stammered. "It's already gone," Dalton said flatly. "I sent a man down there an hour ago. The system was wiped clean remotely. They're already 2 steps ahead of us." He leaned forward, his hands flat on his desk. "Find her. I don't care how you do it. Check every motel, every diner, every back road. Find her before they do. Bring her to me, quietly." In the Pine Ridge Motel, Hayes was laying out the plan. "The car is ready. We leave in 5 minutes. We'll be across the state line in an hour. From there, a private flight will take you wherever you want to go." Sarah shook her head. "No, I'm not leaving." Hayes stopped, his professional calm finally cracking with a flicker of impatience. "Ms. Jennings, the situation is escalating. Sheriff Dalton knows he made a mistake. His men will be looking for you. Staying here is an unnecessary risk." "This isn't just about me anymore," Sarah said, her voice firm. "If I run, they'll bury this. They'll find a scapegoat, sweep it under the rug, and nothing will change. Those 2 deputies have done this before. The fear in that gas station attendant's eyes, they own this town." My objective is to ensure your safety, Hayes countered. My objective, Sarah replied, meeting his gaze, is to burn their whole rotten system to the ground. My father can send lawyers and investigators, but they won't know where to look. The people here are too scared to talk to outsiders. But maybe they'll talk to me, the person who got thrown in the same creek they're all afraid of. Hayes was silent for a moment. He was a soldier, used to following orders, but he also recognized the steel in her voice. It reminded him of her father. This is against my recommendation, he said finally. I know, Sarah said. Tell my father he can send his army, but the general is staying on the field. Dalton's phone rang, the caller ID showing a blocked number. He answered it. Dalton. Sheriff, this is Markham from the State Attorney General's office. The voice was cold, bureaucratic. We've received an inquiry from the Department of Justice regarding a civil rights complaint originating in your county. We need a full report of all official law enforcement interactions from the last 24 hours on my desk by noon. The Department of Justice. It was happening faster than he could have imagined. I'll get right on it, Dalton said, his voice strained. See that you do, Markham said and hung up. Dalton slammed the phone down. He was being boxed in. An hour later, Sarah, now dressed in nondescript jeans and a hoodie, sat in a booth at Earl's Diner, a classic small-town spot with cracked vinyl seats. Hayes sat at the counter watching the door, a newspaper hiding his face. Sarah watched an older man, Earl, work the grill. He moved with a weary resignation. She knew men like Dalton couldn't operate in a vacuum. They needed the silence of people like Earl to survive. She walked up to the counter. Coffee, please, she said. Earl poured her a cup without making eye contact. Slow day? Sarah asked casually. Always is, he mumbled. I ran into some of your deputies yesterday, Sarah said, keeping her voice low. Miller and Kane. Earl's hand flinched, sloshing coffee onto the counter. He grabbed a rag, his head down, refusing to look at her. Don't know 'em, he lied. The wall of fear was thicker than she thought. Breaking it would take more than just asking questions. Sarah left the counter and returned to her booth. The wall was solid. Hayes didn't look up from his newspaper. They're scared, he said, his voice a low murmur. Fear is the currency in this town. Dalton's been collecting it for years. Then it's time to devalue his currency, Sarah replied, taking a sip of the bitter coffee. As she spoke, the distinct rumble of a V8 engine grew louder, and a Garrison County patrol car slowly rolled to a stop right in front of the diner's large windows. Miller and Kane got out. They didn't hurry. They adjusted their belts, their eyes scanning the diner's interior. The quiet chatter inside Earl's Diner died instantly. The clatter of cutlery stopped. Every patron found something interesting to look at on their plate or out the opposite window. Hayes folded his newspaper and placed it on the counter, his right hand disappearing under his windbreaker. This is the engagement your father warned against. This is what I stayed for, Sarah said, not taking her eyes off the door. The bell above the door chimed as the two deputies stepped inside. They let the door swing shut behind them, filling the small space with their presence. Miller's eyes landed on Sarah, and a slow, ugly smile spread across his face. Kane stood by the door, blocking the only exit. Well, look what we have here, Miller said, his voice loud in the dead silence. He started walking toward her booth. We were just looking for you. Sheriff wants a word. Sarah didn't move. She just watched him approach. Is that what he told you? Or did he tell you to find me and bring me in quietly? Miller's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. You've got a smart mouth on you. That's what got you in trouble in the first place. Oh no, Sarah said calmly, her voice carrying through the diner. What got me in trouble was driving through a county run by two thugs who get their kicks from hurting people. Behind the counter, Earl froze, a dish towel in his hand. A young waitress named Amy, who had been refilling salt shakers, dropped one. It shattered on the floor, the sound like a gunshot in the tense room. Kane flinched, his hand instinctively going to his sidearm. You need to come with us now, Miller said, his tone hardening. He was 2 feet from her table. Why? Sarah challenged, leaning forward slightly. Because your boss is scared? Because he knows he messed with the wrong person and now the Attorney General is calling him. He sent you to clean up his mess. Every word was a calculated blow. Miller's face went from smug to confused to angry. He had no idea how she knew that. He looked over at Kane, who just shrugged, his own confidence evaporating. They were used to intimidating defenseless people, not being confronted with facts they thought were secret. The entire diner was watching them, seeing them hesitate. Seeing the cracks in their authority, Miller took another step, reaching for her arm. I said, "Let's go." Before he could touch her, Hayes stood up from the counter. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, a man in a grey windbreaker, but his posture, his unblinking stare, radiated a level of threat the deputies had never encountered. It wasn't the wild threat of a bar fighter, it was the cold, professional calm of a predator. Miller looked from Sarah's defiant face to Hayes's icy stare. He was out of his depth. The script had been flipped. He looked around at the silent, watching faces of the townspeople. He and Kane weren't symbols of power right now. They were fools. "This ain't over," he muttered, pulling his hand back. He turned and walked out, Kane following close behind. The patrol car sped away. The silence in the diner held for a moment longer. Then a few people started talking quietly. The spell was broken. Sarah had faced them down, and they had backed off. As Sarah and Hayes prepared to leave, Earl came over to her booth, ostensibly to wipe it down. He still wouldn't meet her eyes, but as he wiped, he slid a folded napkin across the table toward her. "My nephew," he whispered, so low she could barely hear. "Daniel. They did something to him last year. He won't talk about it, but he might talk to you." Sarah picked up the napkin. An address was scribbled on it. It was the first crack in the wall. As soon as the patrol car was out of sight, Miller and Kane's bravado dissolved into raw panic. The drive back to the station was silent and tense. They knew what was waiting for them. When they walked back into Dalton's office, he wasn't angry anymore. He was something far worse. Cold. He was sitting behind his desk, cleaning a handgun with meticulous, unhurried movements. He didn't look up. "Report," he said, his voice a low, venomous hiss. "Sheriff, she wasn't alone," Kane blurted out. "There was a guy with her. He didn't look right. He looked professional," Miller added, his voice shaking slightly. "Like a Fed, maybe." Dalton finally stopped cleaning the gun and placed it on the desk, perfectly aligned with a stack of papers. He looked at them, and his eyes were completely devoid of emotion. "She's not a victim anymore," Dalton said slowly, making sure they understood every word. "She's a hostile agent operating in my county. She's not hiding. She's gathering intelligence. She's trying to turn my own town against me." He stood up and walked to the county map on the wall. She was at Earl's diner. Why? Because Earl sees everything. He knows everyone. She was trying to get to him. He turned back to his deputies. "Your new job is not to find her. It's to find out who she's talking to. I want eyes on Earl. I want eyes on anyone who looked at you sideways in that diner. And when you find out who she's going to see next, you let me know before she gets there." His tone left no room for failure. This was their last chance. In a nondescript sedan 2 blocks away, Sarah looked at the address on the napkin. Hayes drove, his eyes constantly checking the mirrors. "Going there is a mistake," Hayes said. "Dalton will have his men watching Earl. He might even follow him home. He'll assume Earl gave you something." "He'll assume Earl is a weak link," Sarah corrected him. "He won't be watching the nephew, Daniel. Not yet. Dalton's arrogant. He thinks the fear is enough to keep people like Daniel quiet forever." "It's a high-risk, high-reward play," Hayes conceded. "If this kid talks, he could give us a pattern of abuse, something more than just your incident." "That's the plan," Sarah said, her jaw set. "We're not just cutting off the head of the snake, we're digging up the whole nest." The address led them to a small, poorly maintained house on a dirt road at the edge of the county. A rusted pickup truck sat in the overgrown yard. It was the kind of place people forgot about, which made it perfect for Dalton's brand of justice. "I'm going in alone," Sarah said. "You stay here. Overwatch. If a patrol car even turns down this road, you call me." Hayes nodded, pulling the car into a thicket of trees that gave him a clear view of the house. "You have 3 minutes before I call to check in." Sarah walked up the creaky porch steps and knocked. After a long moment, the door opened a crack. A young man, barely 20, with haunted eyes and a thin, nervous face peered out. "Daniel, what do you want?" he asked, his voice jumpy. "My name is Sarah," she said softly. "Your uncle sent me. I just want to talk." "I don't have anything to say," he said, starting to close the door. "Deputies Miller and Kane threw me into the creek behind the gas station yesterday," Sarah said quickly. The door stopped moving. Daniel's eyes widened, a flicker of recognition in their depths. He saw a shared experience, not a threat. He slowly opened the door. "Why are you here?" he whispered, looking past her at the empty road. "Because I'm not going to let them get away with it," she said. "Not what they did to me, and not what they did to you." Daniel hesitated, then stepped back, letting her inside. "You shouldn't have come," he said, but there was a sliver of hope in his voice. Meanwhile, in Washington, Senator Jennings received a one-word text from Hayes. Contact. He knew it meant Sarah had found a potential witness. He picked up his secure line and made another call. "It's time for the second wave," he said. "Initiate the financial audit. I want a team from the State Comptroller's office in Garrison County by morning. Tell them to start with asset forfeiture records and contracts for county vehicles and services. Sheriff Dalton is about to have a very bad day." The war was now being fought on 2 fronts. Inside Daniel's house, the air was thick with dust and defeat. The living room was small, the furniture old and worn. Daniel wouldn't look at her directly, instead focusing on a spot on the floor. His hands trembled slightly. "What did they do to you, Daniel?" Sarah asked, her voice gentle but firm. He finally looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and anger. "It wasn't the creek," he said, his voice cracking. "It was my truck. It was my grandfather's. He left it to me when he passed. It was all I had." He explained that about a year ago, Miller and Kane had pulled him over for a busted taillight, a simple fix-it ticket. But he had talked back. He asked if they didn't have better things to do. It was the same mistake Sarah had made, challenging their authority. "They didn't like that," Daniel continued, staring at his hands. "They dragged me out of the truck, said I was resisting. They impounded it, said it was evidence. The evidence was never used. Instead, the truck was trapped in a bureaucratic nightmare of Dalton's own design. Impound fees, storage fees, administrative fees. They piled up so fast he could never catch up. After 30 days, the county declared the truck abandoned property and seized it through asset forfeiture. They sold it at a county auction a month later," Daniel finished, his voice hollow. "One of Dalton's business buddies bought it for 1/10 of what it was worth. They didn't just take my truck, they stole my family's history and my ability to make a living." Sarah listened without interrupting. This was it. This was the system. It wasn't just random acts of roadside brutality, it was a structured, profitable enterprise built on intimidation. Daniel's story was the proof. "That's not just abuse of power," Sarah said, her voice turning hard as ice. "That's felony theft under the color of law. It's a federal crime." "What does it matter?" Daniel said, slumping back on his couch. "It's my word against theirs. Who's gonna believe me?" "I believe you," Sarah said, leaning forward. "And I have people who can make others believe you." She made a decision. This was where she stopped being a victim and started being a weapon. "My father is a U.S. senator. He has lawyers. Real lawyers, not small-town ambulance chasers who eat people like Dalton for breakfast. They can get your truck back, or its value, and they can ruin the men who did this. But you have to be willing to fight. You have to be willing to give a sworn statement." For the first time, a spark ignited in Daniel's eyes. The idea of fighting back was something he had long since abandoned. Sarah wasn't just offering sympathy, she was offering a plan. She was offering power. Back at the sheriff's station, Dalton was staring at his map when his desk phone buzzed. It was the county clerk, a man whose loyalty Dalton had bought years ago. "Sheriff, we have a problem," the clerk said, his voice tight with panic. "I just got a call from the state comptroller's office. They're sending a team of auditors. They'll be here tomorrow morning. They're flagging all asset forfeitures and county contracts from the last 5 years." Dalton felt the floor drop out from under him. The civil rights complaint was a brush fire he could contain. A full financial audit was a nuke. They were coming for his money, for his entire operation. It was all connected to the woman. She wasn't just trying to get his deputies in trouble. She was trying to tear down his whole kingdom. "Handle it," Dalton said, his voice dangerously low. "I can't," the clerk squeaked. "This is coming from the top. They have a state mandate." Dalton hung up the phone without another word. He walked back to the map, his eyes burning with fury. He now knew this was a coordinated attack. He had to find the woman. He had to stop her. Now. Sarah walked out of Daniel's house and got back in the car with Hayes. "He'll talk," she said. "He's scared, but he's angry enough to fight." Hayes nodded, starting the car. "Good, because the cavalry has arrived." He handed her his phone. It was a secure message from her father. "A team of state auditors will be at the county courthouse tomorrow at 9 a.m., Hayes said. "They're starting with asset forfeitures." Sarah looked from the phone to Daniel's small, dark house. A slow, determined smile spread across her face. "Dalton thinks he's fighting a battle on one front," she said. "He has no idea the war has already surrounded him." Dalton didn't sleep. His kingdom was on fire, and he could smell the smoke. The auditors were a symptom of the disease, but the woman, Sarah, was the source. He spent the night in his office, not planning a defense, but a counterattack. A legal fight was a slow death. He needed a fast kill. At 3 a.m., he called Miller and Kane into his office. They looked exhausted and scared. "The auditors are coming for the asset forfeiture files," Dalton said, his voice flat. "They're going to find discrepancies. They're going to find Daniel's truck. They're going to find a dozen others just like it. Paper trails can be burned, but witness testimony is harder to erase." He paused, letting the implications sink in. "You saw her at the diner with Earl," Dalton continued. "And Earl has a nephew with a grudge. She went to see him. I know she did." He pointed a thick finger at them. "You two are going to fix the mess you made. Go to the kid's house. Get him to sign a statement saying his uncle put him up to it, that he lied about the truck for money. Persuade him." The word persuade hung in the air, heavy with unspoken violence. "And the woman?" Miller asked. "If she's there," Dalton said, his eyes like chips of flint. "Neutralize the threat. I don't care how. This ends tonight." Meanwhile, Sarah and Hayes were operating out of a new, cleaner motel room in the next town over, a temporary command center. Daniel was with them, huddled in a chair, looking terrified but resolute. "Dalton knows the auditors are coming," Hayes said, looking at his tablet which displayed satellite imagery of the sheriff's station. "Lights are on. A shredding truck arrived an hour ago. He's destroying evidence." "He's not just going to shred paper," Sarah said. "He's going to try and shred his witnesses. He knows I talked to Earl. He'll make the connection to Daniel. He's a liability out there." "Agreed," Hayes said. "A legal team is flying in. They'll land at a private airfield at 0600. They'll take Daniel's official deposition and place him in protective custody. We just need to keep him safe for 3 more hours." Sarah looked at Daniel. His fear was palpable. He was a pawn in a very dangerous game. This was no longer just about justice, it was about survival. "Dalton's expecting us to hide," Sarah thought out loud. "He thinks we'll run. He won't expect us to go back." She looked at Hayes. "We need to get Earl. Dalton's men will be watching him, but they'll get sloppy, impatient. They'll go for Daniel first. That's our window." It was a gamble. Splitting their focus was risky, but leaving Earl to Dalton's mercy was not an option. He had taken the first step. They had to protect him. "I'll make the call," Hayes said, understanding her logic. He began typing a message to a DC number. Back in Garrison, Miller and Kane were parked in an unmarked car down the street from Earl's diner, which was dark and closed. They had been watching his small apartment above it for hours. "This is a waste of time," Kane complained. "The old man's asleep." "Sheriff said watch him," Miller grunted, his eyes strained. Just then, a light flicked on in Earl's apartment. Through the thin curtains, they could see his silhouette pacing. He picked up a phone. Miller grabbed a pair of binoculars with a directional microphone attachment. He focused on the window, listening. "Daniel, you need to get out of there." Earl's panicked voice crackled through the earpiece. "I saw one of Dalton's cars. I think they know. Are you with that woman? Is she keeping you safe?" Miller lowered the binoculars, a grim smile on his face. "Bingo. The old man just confirmed it for us." He started the car. "The kid is the target. Let's go persuade him." "Adi." He pulled the car onto the road, tires squealing as he sped toward the dirt road on the edge of the county. From his position in the trees, Hayes's phone buzzed with an alert from a motion sensor he'd placed on the main road leading to Daniel's house. "Vehicle approaching, fast," he said into his comms unit to Sarah, who was in the car with Daniel, ready to move him to a secondary location. "Is it a patrol car?" Sarah asked, her heart pounding. "Worse," Hayes replied using his night vision scope. "Unmarked sedan, 2 occupants. It's Miller and Kane." The 2 cars were now on a collision course, both heading for the same small, isolated house in the dark. The time for strategy was over. There was no time to run. The crunch of tires on the dirt road was a death sentence approaching. "Get Daniel in the back room," Hayes commanded, his voice a low, urgent whisper. "Bar the door. Stay down and stay quiet. Do not come out, no matter what you hear." Sarah didn't hesitate. She grabbed Daniel, who was frozen with terror, and pulled him toward the small bedroom. His feet felt like lead. She shoved him inside and dragged a heavy, worn-out dresser in front of the flimsy door. It wouldn't stop a determined push, but it might buy a second. "Stay away from the window," she whispered to Daniel through the door, before backing away into the shadows of the main room, her heart hammering against her ribs. Outside, Miller and Kane's sedan skidded to a halt in the yard, its headlights cutting through the darkness and illuminating the front of the house. They got out, leaving the doors open. They weren't planning on a long visit. Miller was carrying a heavy tire iron. The front door splintered, kicked open with a single violent blow. Kane entered first, a maglite in one hand, his other hand on his holstered gun. "Sheriff's Department, we know you're in here, kid," he yelled into the darkness. He took 2 steps into the living room. From the deepest shadows near the kitchen, a shape moved with impossible speed. A sharp crackle of electricity filled the air, and Kane's body went rigid. He convulsed for a second before collapsing to the floor in a heap, the taser wires still attached to his back. Miller, still on the porch, saw his partner go down. "What the—" He drew his weapon and blindly fired 2 shots into the dark house. The explosions were deafening in the enclosed space. Wood splintered from a wall. The muzzle flashes were his final mistake. They gave Hayes his exact position. Before Miller could fire a 3rd shot, Hayes was on him. He moved from the doorway, a blur of motion. One hand clamped down on Miller's wrist, twisting it with brutal efficiency until the gun clattered to the porch floor. The other hand delivered a single, precise strike to the side of Miller's head. The impact of bone on bone echoed in the small room. Miller crumpled without a sound, landing half in and half out of the doorway. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 10 seconds. Silence. The only sound was the hum of the sedan's engine outside. Sarah slowly emerged from the shadows, her eyes wide. Hayes was already pulling zip ties from his pocket and securing the unconscious deputy's hands and feet. "Are they?" she started to ask. "Incapacitated," Hayes said, his breathing perfectly even. He kicked Miller's drop tire iron. This was their persuasion tool. Sarah knelt and picked it up, cold, heavy steel. This was the proof. This was what they could show the world. This was attempted assault, witness tampering, everything. As she stood up, the distant sound of another vehicle grew louder. Not a roaring engine like the deputy's car, but the smooth, confident hum of multiple well-maintained engines. Headlights swept across the yard. 2 black SUVs, the kind favored by federal agencies, pulled up behind the deputy's sedan. They parked with practiced precision, boxing the car in. 4 men in dark, practical suits got out. They moved with the same quiet purpose as Hayes. The lead man, sharp and grey-haired, walked up the porch steps, stepping over Miller's unconscious form without a second glance. He looked at Sarah, then at Hayes, who gave a slight nod. "Ms. Jennings?" the man asked, his voice calm and professional, as if he had just walked into a boardroom. "We're here for the deposition. I trust the witness is secure?" Sarah looked from the unconscious forms of Miller and Kane, the symbols of Dalton's brutal power, to the calm, efficient faces of her father's men. The physical battle was over. The real fight was just beginning. The lead lawyer, a man named Peterson, took charge with chilling efficiency. His team photographed the scene, catalogued the evidence, the tire iron, Miller's gun, and took Daniel into one of the SUVs to get his preliminary statement. 2 other men, paramedics, attended to the unconscious deputies, checking their vitals before cuffing them to gurneys. It was a well-oiled machine, dismantling a crime scene and securing a witness with practiced ease. "We'll take it from here, Hayes," Peterson said, closing a briefcase with a sharp click. "The witness is secure. The suspects are in custody. State police are en route to take possession of the deputies and transport them to a federal holding facility." Hayes nodded. "And Dalton, the auditors will tie him up in legal knots for the next decade," Peterson said. "He'll be indicted within the week." But Sarah shook her head. It wasn't enough. A quiet indictment, a legal process hidden from the public eye, would let the town's fear fester. It wouldn't heal anything. She turned to Hayes. "It's not over. Not until I face him." "Sarah, it's done," Hayes said, his voice low. "Let the system handle it." "The system is what allowed him to exist in the first place," she shot back. "I started this. I'm finishing it. Take me to the station." The sun was just beginning to cast a pale light over Garrison County as they pulled up across the street from the sheriff's station. Across the town square, 2 sedans with state government plates were parking in front of the courthouse. The auditors had arrived. "He's in there," Hayes said, pointing to the single-lit window of the sheriff's office. "Alone. He's cornered. Don't do this." "Stay here," Sarah said, getting out of the car. "This is between me and him." She walked across the empty street, her footsteps echoing in the morning quiet. She didn't hesitate at the door. She pushed it open and walked in. Dalton was sitting behind his desk, just as he had been in her mind's eye. A half-empty bottle of whiskey was on the desk next to the polished silver buckle. Leaning against the wall behind him was a pump-action shotgun. He wasn't surprised to see her. He looked like a man who had been waiting for the end of the world and was resigned to see it arrive. "So the senator's daughter comes to see the mess she made," he said, his voice a gravelly rasp. "I didn't make this mess, Sheriff," Sarah said, stopping 10 feet from his desk. "I just turned on the lights." "This was my town," he growled, his hand inching toward the whiskey bottle. "We had order, we had respect." "You had fear," Sarah corrected him, "and it's a currency that just went bankrupt." He laughed, a bitter, ugly sound. "You think you've won? You and your daddy's lawyers. I'll be out on bail by tomorrow. This town still belongs to me." He stood up, his massive frame casting a long shadow in the dim light. He reached behind him and grabbed the shotgun. "But you won't be here to see it." He racked a shell into the chamber, the sound a definitive metallic threat. Sarah didn't flinch. She simply held up her phone. The screen was black, but a small red light indicated it was recording. Live. "The whole world is watching, Sheriff," she said, her voice steady and clear. "And so are they." She gestured to the large window that looked out onto the town square. Dalton followed her gaze. Standing on the courthouse steps, watching, was Earl. Next to him was the waitress from the diner, Amy. Then another face he recognized and another. A small crowd had gathered. They weren't angry. They weren't shouting. They were just watching, their silence a more powerful condemnation than any riot. Dalton stared, the shotgun suddenly heavy in his hands. His power had never come from a gun. It had come from their silence, their fear, their belief that he was untouchable. And in one instant, she had taken it all away. The door to the station burst open, and 2 state troopers in crisp uniforms entered, weapons drawn. "Sheriff Dalton, put the weapon down!" Dalton looked from the troopers to the crowd, to Sarah. He saw the truth in her eyes. He was no longer a king in his castle. He was just a man in a room, and his time was up. The shotgun clattered to the floor. 6 months later, the Garrison County Sheriff's Department was under state receivership. Dalton, denied bail, was convicted on a dozen federal charges, from racketeering to witness tampering. The live stream video from Sarah's phone had made his trial a national spectacle and an open and shut case. He was sentenced to 30 years in a federal prison, a place where his brand of intimidation meant nothing. Miller and Kane, in exchange for their testimony against their former boss, received lesser sentences. They had traded their loyalty for a few years of freedom, but in Garrison County, their names were now synonymous with cowardice. The town itself was breathing again. The quiet fear that had hung in the air for decades had dissipated. Earl's Diner was busier than ever, the conversations louder, the laughter more frequent. People made eye contact now. The state-appointed sheriff was a by-the-book professional who was more interested in community policing than in building an empire. The change was slow, but it was real. Daniel got his grandfather's truck back. The law firm Senator Jennings had dispatched located it, bought it back from Dalton's crony, and had it fully restored. It was more than a vehicle. It was a symbol that the system, when forced, could work for the little guy. Daniel was no longer the haunted, frightened boy Sarah had met. He was taking mechanic classes at the community college and had become an unlikely, quiet leader among the town's youth, a living example that speaking up was not a death sentence. Sarah didn't go back to her old life on the road. The call of the highway was still there, but what happened in Garrison had awakened something else in her. She had seen firsthand how power could be abused, but also how it could be used as a scalpel to cut out a cancer. She had spent years running from her father's name, only to realize it was the most powerful tool she had. She didn't move to Washington. She didn't trade her work boots for heels. Instead, she and her father reached a new understanding. With his funding and her direction, she established the Jennings Justice Project, a non-profit organization that provided legal resources and investigative support to people in small towns who were being crushed by local corruption. Hayes became her head of operations. They were a small, mobile team, using the same tactics they had used in Garrison: find the crack in the wall, apply pressure, and let the light in. One evening, sitting in a motel room that looked remarkably like the one where it all began, she got a call. It was her father. "I saw the news about that town in West Virginia," he said, his voice the same crisp, professional tone. "The mayor and the police chief resigned." "They didn't have much choice," Sarah replied, a hint of a smile in her voice. The evidence was compelling. There was a pause, but it was a different kind of silence than before. It wasn't the silence of distance. It was the silence of understanding. "You're good at this, Sarah," he said. It was the highest praise he knew how to give. "I had a good teacher," she said, and for the first time in a long time, it felt true. She was no longer just a truck driver or just a senator's daughter. She was both, and she was just getting started. Sarah's story is a powerful reminder that the most deeply entrenched systems of corruption are often held up by the silence of good people. It wasn't just the power of a senator that brought Dalton down. It was the courage of one woman who refused to be a victim, and the bravery of a few townspeople who finally decided to bear witness. Dalton's empire wasn't destroyed by a bomb. It was dismantled by the truth. This story shows that true justice isn't just about punishing the guilty, it's about restoring the voice of the silenced. It's about giving people like Daniel their future back and allowing towns like Garrison to breathe free from the shadow of fear. It started with a single brutal act of humiliation at a creek, but it ended with an entire community finding its strength. We believe that stories like this matter. They aren't just entertainment, they are a reflection of the struggles and triumphs that happen every day in forgotten corners of the world. By watching, liking, and sharing, you help us bring these narratives to light, showing that no one is truly powerless when they have the courage to stand up. If this story of justice and resilience moved you, and you believe in the power of fighting back against corruption, please take a moment to support our channel. Hit that like button, and if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another incredible story. Your engagement is what allows us to continue telling these important tales. To show us that you are part of the community that supports this mission from beginning to end, please comment down below with the phrase, "I watched until the end." It lets us know who our most dedicated viewers are, and it truly helps the channel more than you can imagine. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Garrison County. The fight for justice never truly ends, and we have many more stories to tell. If you want to see what happens when a corrupt CEO tries to fire his own father, unaware that the old man secretly signed over the company to his most loyal employee years ago, click on the video that's appearing on your screen right now. It's a story of corporate greed and family betrayal that you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.